Hey everyone, welcome back to Chasing Art. This will be part 2 of our 3-part series on drawing the round Island Lighthouse. And if you haven't seen part 1 yet, I'll put a link up to it towards the end. You can grab it then, go back and check out and see how I did the clouds. Now I do jump around a lot in this, with what pencils, blending stumps, and erasers I might be using. But just keep in mind that if I have the silver one in my hand like I have right now, that one will be a HB. This black one that I'm using is a 4H. And if you see a blue one pop into my hand, it's probably also another HB, but it'll be a 2mm lead instead. And the reason for that is the blue one I use more for general overall shading, and the silver one will be for more deliberate shading and tighter line work. And that's a 0.5mm lead in that, so that's kind of what it lends itself to. I'm starting out with a couple of the outbuildings that are on the island, and mainly just because they're towards the left side, and I try to go from left to right because I'm right-handed, so that way I'm not constantly coming back across my drawing and taking the chance of possibly smudging something. And this section is actually a very distant shoreline of Michigan's Lower Peninsula. And like I say, it's way back in the distance, so I'm just trying to get in some shapes, kind of represent some trees on the shoreline back there. And you'll see it'll continue all the way across the drawing as I progress. And this is just some of the water in between the island and the Lower Peninsula. And there's very little detail in there. It's so far away that you really can't see any of the crest of the waves or a whole lot of reflection, but I did leave a few lighter spots just to kind of give the illusion of water. This island is just rimmed with a plethora of boulders. So we really got our work cut out ahead of us as far as doing these, because you want each one of them to kind of have their own individual character, but yet they're all kind of laying in a row, so they are similar, but each one's a little bit different. And since I'm already using some artistic license by changing my light source from my reference photo, I can kind of do whatever I want as far as how the light's hitting them and how the shadows are falling, so that makes it a little bit easier. And finally, we get to the lighthouse. And I'm going to give you a little bit of history on this. It was built in 1895 for the enormous sum of $15,000, which actually is about $560,000 today. So honestly, even by today's standards, that doesn't seem unreasonable. But it did have some sad times throughout its history. In 1924, the beacon was automated, and then in 1939, it became the responsibility of the United States Coast Guard. And that was the year that they took over all of the nation's lighthouses. But then in 1947, an automated light was constructed in relatively close proximity to it. So the Coast Guard actually decommissioned and abandoned the Round Island Lighthouse. Now, a few years later, they got tired of maintaining this unused structure, so the Coast Guard recommended that it be demolished. Luckily, at that time, the lighthouse was transferred to the Hiawatha National Forest and was saved from being torn down. And since this place was abandoned with no upkeep, it started to deteriorate. And in fact, by 1972, it was just starting to fall down on its own. Luckily, that was about the time that some local preservationists set their sights on it. And over the next few years, the rocks were added to the shoreline to help reduce erosion. And with the aid of groups such as the Friends of Round Island, private donations, and government funds, the walls and foundation were restored. So finally, on July 3rd, 1978, the lighthouse had its formal dedication into the National Register of Historical Places. And then, as an interesting side note, in 1980 it was featured in the movie Somewhere in Time with Christopher Reeve and Jane Seymour. Since that time, the island and its buildings have been taken care of by many different groups, including the Boy Scouts of America, and they were all working to preserve and restore the lighthouse to its original condition. And finally, to finish up this very brief history lesson, in 2009 the Round Island Lighthouse Preservation Society was formed as a nonprofit to aid the continued preservation and restoration efforts. I did a quick search online to make sure that they were still active, and they do still have an active Facebook page, so if you're interested in keeping up with what they do, check out the Round Island Lighthouse Preservation Society on Facebook. I'm sure that they would appreciate it, and it's actually pretty cool to see what they're doing up there.